Hey everybody, I hope and pray that you're doing well. Today as we come to our word from the word. And today that word is charge. Charge. Now, today if you're watching daily, happy Thanksgiving. I always have something to be thankful for. And as you'll see through today and what we're going to look at tomorrow as we're in Acts chapter 7 and then chapter 8, these events kind of come together. There has been, we have, in chapter 7, you see Stephen being brought before, he's been brought up on charges. Basically, he's the one that's being put before everybody saying, look, he's speaking blasphemy. He should not be saying these things. We need to beat him. We need to throw him out of town. And what they end up doing is stoning him and killing him by the end of the chapter. But if you look and you listen to what Stephen is saying as he's preaching basically to the Sanhedrin, telling them, he gives them a very clear history. And so even though they brought charges against him, he's bringing charges against them. Now, remember, Stephen is full of the Holy Spirit. So the fact that they were going against him meant that they were actually going against God and they were disagreeing with God's message because it wasn't Stephen's message. It was God's message through his messenger in Stephen. Now, this is going to really directly play into what we'll talk about tomorrow as well. But for today, let's look at just this portion. Acts chapter 7, verses 51 through 53 comes at the end of his sermon, and this is the part that he's bringing the charges against them. Notice what he says. He says, "You stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears, you always resist the Holy Spirit, as your fathers did, so do you. Which of the prophets did your fathers not persecute? And they killed those who foretold the coming of the Just One, of whom you now have become the betrayers and murderers, who have received the law by the direction of angels and have not kept it." In other words, as he goes through this, he says, look, just like I've just telling you, and I encourage you as always, read the whole chapter. He says, look, don't you remember that the people rejected Joseph? I mean, even in his own family, he was rejected. And yet God used him to be second in command over Egypt to save a nation. He says, don't you remember too that Moses, even though when he was trying to protect one of his own there while he was still being treated as an Egyptian, had power like an Egyptian, and he was wrong, but he was trying to protect, and he murders an Egyptian in protecting another Hebrew. And then the next day they accuse him of trying to be ruler over them. So he has to basically run and be in hiding for 40 years. And yet Moses was called back to be leading the people. And then what happens? He leads them out of Egypt, and then they reject him again, reject God, and then they end up setting up a golden calf and saying, this is your God. Now, Israel and even the Sanhedrin, right, as it had gone through time, they would look back and say, we have sinned. And they would say, as our fathers sinned against God in the golden calf. And they would look back at those moments and not be proud of them. What Stephen is saying is, you stiff-necked and uncircumcised of hearts and ears. In other words, that stiff-necked is something that was used in that time to refer to Moses. To refer to the Israelites in Moses' time quite often. It meant that they were doing things on their own. They were prideful. In other words, they would not humble themselves. They kind of think about sticking your neck up in the air or your nose up in the air and saying, I'm going to do it my way. And that's exactly what the Sanhedrin knew. The Old Testament, which is all they had, I know, that he's saying, look, our fathers, that's what they used to do. Which Stephen is saying, Sanhedrin, you are just like them. You are not paying attention to what God is trying to tell you. You are stiff-necked. You claim that you have this physical circumcision, and you boast about that, but you're not actually having a circumcised heart. In other words, your heart has not been changed. It has not been made to go after God. And so, man, when they hear this charge, this is what actually puts them over the edge, and they end up stoning and killing Stephen. Now, you think about that. How often Do we look at even the disciples and say, man, I can't believe they didn't believe God. Man, I can't believe that they didn't believe what Jesus was going to do. I can't believe that they doubted Jesus would be able to perform such and such a miracle. I can't believe that they would do this. Go to Romans chapter 1, where we just finished up our November series on Sunday mornings. And we look and say, man, how could so many people turn against God? How could they just turn their backs on him and deny the creation and deny all these things and then worship the creature and not the creator? If you notice how many times we can very clearly bring charges against others and bring charges against those who we know did wrong. But yet I wonder how many times the Holy Spirit is speaking to us. How many times maybe the Holy Spirit is speaking through ones like Stephen to us and saying, hold on just a second. Don't you understand? You're doing the exact same thing. Just as we would accuse previous generations of the church of not trusting God, not being faithful to God, not putting priority to the things that really have to do with what God would have us to do. And we would say, man, I can't, that generation dropped the ball and that generation did this and that generation did this. And even our current generation is doing this and our nation is doing that. But if we're not careful, the same charges we bring against others could actually be charges brought against us. Today, if we had someone standing full of the Holy Spirit preaching to us, would they be saying, as what we desire to hear from God when we get to heaven, well done, my good and faithful servant? Or would we hear that, depart from me, I never knew you? Would we hear him say, you're being stiff-necked and prideful? Would they say you're doing the exact same wrong things previous generations have done? Or would they say, hey, you're following after our fathers? See, when Stephen said our fathers, he was talking about the patriarchs that did right. And when he said your fathers, he was talking about those who came against, those who disobeyed, and those who even murdered and killed Jesus. Today, are the godly your fathers or the ungodly? Today, the charge is going to go one way or the other. Which way will it be for you? God bless you, and I pray you have a great, great day.